Hi, welcome to The Inner Way. I'm your host, Father David Smith. I said in last week's video that I had missed a few weeks and that I was going to try to get back onto a weekly schedule. And then when I shot a video, I ended up having some computer problems. It's amazing to me that just a simple thing really caused me trouble over the course of several weeks. And it took me a little while to figure out, but I have figured it out. And so hopefully I'll be able to sort of get back on track, at least until we finish the first part of Unseen Warfare, which is the book that we've been studying. And I hope it has been as beneficial for you in your spiritual life as this book has been in my spiritual life. Last week, the chapter we're looking at this week is chapter 27. Now, not last week, but last program, we talked about the imagination, and this is a real important thing in my own life. I really like to look at where my thoughts are going, because I know that in anything, if it's my struggles with eating, or my struggles with getting angry, or wanting revenge on people, or whatever the case may be, that all of that starts up in the imagination. And sometimes it'll come down into the volition and into actual acts of sin and so on and so forth. But I have been struggling long enough to know, and reading enough books like Unseen Warfare to know, that it all starts in the imagination. Chapter 27, so that was chapter 26, basically, in a nutshell. It's a very long chapter, chapter 26, and a beautiful one. But chapter 27 looks at a part of that. And that is when things happen to us, and it's not simply us giving into our imagination. There are some times when disturbances come into our minds, and it doesn't have anything to do with us allowing them to come in. Things happen around us all the time that can disturb our inner peace and can disturb our imagination. So the title of chapter 27 is "A Warrior of Christ Should Use All Means to Avoid Worries and Agitations of the Heart if he wishes really to overcome his enemies." And again, as we've said before, the enemies we're talking about are demons. There are constantly demons trying to upend our relationship with God, our peace in God, and our imaginations. And so these are the enemies, and there are some times when these enemies use external forces against us. I'll start reading right at the beginning of the chapter. "Just as it is a pressing duty of every Christian, when he loses his peace of heart, to do all he can to restore it, so it is no less obligatory for him to allow no accidental happenings of life to disturb this peace. I mean, illness, wounds, death of relatives, wars, fires, sudden joys, fears and sorrows, memories of former sins and errors, in a word, everything which usually troubles and agitates the heart." So Now I don't know if I would have included everything in that list, because when we're talking about memories of former sins and errors, and even to some degree fears and sorrows, those are often self-generated. And so I'm not sure if I quite agree with unseen warfare on that account. But those other things, illnesses, wounds, death of relatives, wars, fires, sudden joys, that's a funny thing to put in there, that, sometimes your inner peace can be disturbed just as much by some wonderful honor coming your way, or some wonderful opportunity coming your way, or an inheritance or something like that coming your way, and making you feel differently about the future in such a way that you no longer rely on God. And so that's really the issue, is when these things happen to us, illness, for instance. When illness happens to us, do we look ahead to the future thinking, this might be the end of me, and that brings me inner turmoil, or illnesses, or death of relatives, or wars and fires and things like sort of disasters that happen around us. Even in my own experience, we had something happen to our building here, St. Sophia's, and the building had to be closed for a number of months. And so it was really, really a very, very difficult time. And you're upset by that, and it has a way of potentially disturbing your inner peace. Now, as I was reading through this again this week, and thinking about the various parts of this chapter, and how I would present this chapter, I was actually at the same time reading through one of the Psalms, Psalm 118, which is Psalm 119 in Protestant Bibles, Psalm 118, which is the longest of the Psalms. And in that, I was looking at verse 33 in particular. Give me as law, O Lord, the way of your ordinances, and I shall always search them. I'm quoting from the Orthodox Study Bible here. Give me as law, O Lord, the way of your ordinances, and I shall always search them. I looked in a different translation, and it said continually search them. So I wonder what the word really is. Well, in the Greek, the word that is translated here as always is diapandos, and that means really always. It's a sort of I don't know what they call it, but the two words put together really mean something slightly different than the two words separate from one another. But the two words separate really give us, I think, a deeper insight into that verse, because what it's saying, dia, is through pandos, everything. So it's not simply a matter of ongoing. I'm going to always search out your law with my heart. It's not that, but it is, I am going to search out your law with my heart through everything. This is something that I've discovered being a priest for 30 years. I've discovered that a lot of times people will encounter things in their lives that make them really question if if all the energy we put into Christianity is really worth it. Things happen to them that, they've prayed that something different would happen, and yet something happens that's terrible. That's exactly what they did not want to have happen. And so they end up pulling back from God. Their spiritual life becomes cold, even for sometimes a matter of years. Before they return back and say, it was really silly of me to walk away and I want to come back now, which is a beautiful thing when they do. But still, that wandering away when things don't turn out the way we want them to is the problem. And so this one verse that I love so much from Psalm 119, give me as law, O Lord, the way of your ordinances, and I shall in all circumstances search them. I will, when bad things happen, search out to know you. When good things happen, I want to use it to know you. I want to use every single circumstance in my life to help me to know you better, to learn about you, to know about you in my life. And so that's really, dropped my book here, that's really, in my opinion, that's really the answer to this problem that is presented at the beginning of chapter 27, that we continue to search for God even in the midst of things that happen to us that make it appear as if God is not really in control. And certainly this is exactly what unseen warfare says. So I think I'm going to read from the second to the last paragraph. It goes like this. And here is a general means for making peace in the heart when some affliction tries to disturb it. With all your strength, make firm your faith in the goodness of God's providence toward you, and revive in your soul a devoted submission to God's will. Then introduce into the heart the reflections mentioned above and urge it to feel that the affliction you suffer at this moment is either a means by which the Lord puts you to the test, or a purifying penance he imposes on you, or that he thus presses you to repent, either in general or particularly in connection with some wrong action of yours which has remained forgotten. So this way of looking at those misfortunes that come from outside that disturb our inner peace, this way of looking at how to maintain our peace says, I am always going to trust in God's providence. Where this is taking me, I don't know. At some point in my existence, I will understand. I don't understand right now, but I am going to do my best to maintain my peace of mind throughout this. In some cases, in my own life, I've shared before how I became sick, very sick, back in 2018, and it was really, in terms of my prayer life, really very helpful, because I spent a lot more time praying. And I wasn't praying that I would get better. I was praying simply because I really couldn't do anything else. I couldn't move around. I was too sick to even, I didn't want to watch TV, and I didn't want to read. I didn't want to write. I didn't want to do anything. And so I said to myself, well, I'm going to pray. And I prayed, and it was a beautiful experience. I never would pray that I would get sick, so that I could have that happen, but nonetheless, it was something. But I have had other times in my life when things have happened to me and I find myself losing sleep over them. Usually has to do with something someone else has done to me, and you stew about it, and you try to pray, and it just doesn't happen. It is when I say to myself, God has allowed this to happen. God is teaching me humility. God is teaching me patience. God is teaching me to forgive. God is teaching me that my future or my reputation or my sense of my own self is in His hands. I have been bought with a price, as 1 Corinthians says, and my life is no longer mine. I give myself over to God, and I'm going to allow whatever happens, I'm going to think about it, because I always want to respond in the best way possible. So I'll think about things like that. It's not like we ignore things going on around us, not at all. But I don't allow it to enter into my heart and take away my inner peace, as much of it as I have as a person who's just learning the spiritual life. Well, the computer's working, and so next week I hope to be back with chapter 28 of Unseen Warfare, another great chapter, sort of similar to what it talked about this week, but with something additional for us to meditate on. I hope you can join me next week, and until then, God bless you, and I'll see you in church.